Morning to Iran firing more than a dozen ballistic missiles at two Iraqi military bases housing these U.S. troops. What's Washington's response to this?
Well, on the initial news of these strikes, there was a large amount of concern here that there had been such a sudden and direct hit on American facilities by the Iranians. This is the first time during this kind of conflict between the two countries that Iran has not hidden behind its proxies in the region, but actually launched Iranian missiles from inside Iran directly onto American personnel and facilities. So it really seemed like a big uptick in the level of this conflict. However, a few hours later, and also just before that, Donald Trump had been issuing threats to Iran, suggesting that if they did retaliate in any way, that the US would retaliate even more strongly. So there was a lot of concern and talk here in Washington about what that would mean. However, fast forward a few hours and we have Donald Trump, the White House, postponing an address to the nation that it was mooted that Donald Trump would give a TV address to the United States from the Oval Office. He has postponed that and says that he will speak to Americans later on Wednesday morning here in Washington. It's still kind of the middle of the night. It's the early hours of the morning here. He's expected to do that later on this morning. And he also issued a tweet saying, all is good, all's okay, so far so good. Kind of a very restrained, calm, kind of measured response to things. And at the same time, the foreign minister of Iran, Javad Zarif, also tweeted to say that the Iranian response had been concluded and that it had been proportionate. And he went on to say that Iran is not seeking any kind of escalation or war with the United States. So at this precise moment, it feels like there's some kind of calm. Everyone is taking a breath. Of course, things could change rapidly, as they often do with the Trump administration and with the Iranians. But right this second, if both those men's tweets are to be believed, things seem a little calmer.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well that there's no casualties in the retaliation from Iran, something maybe to look into or read into. A number of countries, Kate, have called for restraint and calm. So do you reckon that that message has got through to the American president?
Well, as you mentioned there, it has been speculated upon the fact that, although we don't have confirmation yet from the Pentagon, there don't appear to have been American casualties in these strikes. And there are analysts who are speculating that the Iranians have enough technology for their missiles now to make sure that they land in a specific area and that they purposefully did not target American lives during these strikes, suggesting perhaps that they were trying to send a message of their strength, their military strength and their ability to launch this kind of strike without actually causing physical harm to people. That would give a strong message to Iranians at home who have taken to the streets in recent days shouting death to America. They clearly needed to have some kind of response, but at the same time not making too much of a strong response that would mean that the Americans were really forced to also retaliate back. Of course, there are also other analysts who suggest that perhaps the Iranians just got this a bit wrong and didn't actually hit the targets they intended to. Again, I think we'll know more once President Trump speaks later this morning, because he will then have all the information from the Pentagon. They will have done their full survey assessment of what was damaged during the strikes, and he will know kind of the level of response that he wants to make.
In this clarion call for President Donald Trump to provide proof that General Qasem Soleimani was actually an imminent threat, any such being furnished as yet?
Yeah, that is still very much lacking in all of this, and President Trump's critics and Democrat lawmakers in particular have been calling for this ever since it happened. The members of Congress are due to be briefed by the White House later on today on whatever evidence they had for this strike. But in the days that have passed, no administration official has been able to give anything particularly concrete other than to say that they believe that there was a strike on American military being planned in the coming days. But they don't appear to have much more than that.
You know, just listening to reports coming out from America, it seems that there's this unanimous feeling that General Qasem Soleimani was indeed a bad actor. If you go to Iran, it's the complete opposite. Talk to us about the sentiment on the ground. In terms of the American people, is there appetite for yet another war?
I think that is no, I don't believe there is. I think the majority of people are tired of wars. And in fact, Donald Trump came to office promising to end wars in the Middle East. He said that the US should no longer be the world's policeman, and yet his actions have been slightly different in this situation. So there are lots of people that don't want to see another war. In fact, there's been a recent poll, not since these airstrikes by Iran, but since the assassination of the general, that showed that the majority of Americans are concerned and worried about a potential war with Iran, and they don't want to see that. There are, of course, hawks around the president and in Congress who would like to see a much tougher stance on Iran and have long lobbied for that. So there are people who are pleased by what has happened. But the general feeling I get is that the majority of Americans don't want to see a war, don't want to see Americans put in harm's way, and don't want to spend the money on another Middle Eastern war.
President Trump has no doubt a lot on his plate, conflict with Iran and also dealing with impeachment. What's the latest with regards to the impeachment issue?
Yeah, it's hard to remember that only a couple of weeks ago that was the biggest story here in the United States, and it is still rumbling along. We are at something of a stalemate. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has those articles of impeachment, 2 articles of impeachment. The next step is for her to give those to the Senate, and that would then trigger the trial of the president, which takes place in the Senate. Now, she hasn't done that yet, because she says she is concerned as to whether it will be a fair trial. She wants to know the terms of how it will be managed before she starts that process. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the Senate, is saying that he will do it the way he wants to do it. A little kind of spanner in the works over the last day or so is that John Bolton, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, and a key witness that Democrats would like to hear from, had originally said he wouldn't give evidence, but has now said he'd be willing to speak in a Senate trial. Democrats, of course, want that to happen and are putting pressure on Republicans for that to happen during any Senate trial, and the Republicans don't really want him to be put on the stand. So there is something of a conflict going on there at the moment.
Yeah, John Bolton is an interesting twist to this tale. Kate Fisher, live for us in the American capital, Washington, D.C. Thank you. Well, several countries have stopped flights from operating in and around Iran and Iraq after Iran launched missile attacks on the United States-led forces in Iraq. The United Arab Emirates, India, and the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration are among countries that have banned their carriers from operating in the airspace. Iran says it launched the missile attack this morning in retaliation for a U.S. strike on Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani. For more on this story, we are now joined on the line from Iran